As the year comes to a close, one of the biggest things that goes on within the gaming community are the Game Awards. And for 2024, it was a great show, with crazy game announcements like The Witcher 4, Elden Ring Night Reign, and Naughty Dog's new IP. But outside of the crazy announcements, people tune into the Game Awards to see what game wins Game of the Year. And for 2024, that was Astrobot, which I'm not entirely mad that it won. Honestly, I thought it would. But Metaphor ReFantazio was my personal pick and the game that I think should have won. This fantasy JRPG was developed by Atlus, who is known for Persona and Shin Megami Tensei. Watching them take a step in a new direction, actually make a completely new IP, was very interesting to see. And they absolutely nailed it with Metaphor blowing up and becoming Atlus's fastest game to reach 1 million sales and getting unbelievable reviews by every fan and critic. This year was the first year of me playing any Atlus game, as I played Persona 3 Reload for the first time during the summer. I loved it so much that Metaphor became my most anticipated game for the remainder of the year. All I can say is that it did not disappoint whatsoever. They made a rich world with such depth in its lore and characters, amazing combat that brought a fun mix of real-time and turn-based combat. They also brought an art style that felt so unique, and I was constantly in awe of its designs for characters, cities, and bosses. And an amazing narrative that pushed heavy themes, and I think they handled all of it very well. They do a good job of showing these themes and this idea of overcoming these obstacles and having hope for the future in a more unified world. Overall, this is one of the best games I played this year, and out of the games nominated for Game of the Year, I think it should have won, and I'll explain why. This is going to be a combination of me reviewing the game mostly spoiler free, I'll let you know when I get into some spoilers, and arguing why it should have won Game of the Year. So, let's get right into it. Something that Atlus has always been praised for throughout its years is their amazing art style. But I feel like they took it to the next level here with Metaphor. Every city that you visit feels so unique from one another, and all the characters are crafted with such detail, and with there being such a wide range of races, in the game we interact with so many people that are so well made. I always find it so amazing how these people craft these worlds with this type of detail. I've begun to appreciate it more within movies, TV shows, and video games, but I've been noticing myself paying more attention to the set piece and the smaller details of it. And I'm just always amazed at how people's minds come up with these smaller details to put into environments, and Metaphor does an unbelievable job at it. And not just its set pieces, but the bosses. I could not get over how creepy each human was in this game. They were also deformed, and it genuinely felt like the artists for this game just decided to come up with the most random ideas and put them together, and those made the bosses. They didn't really come up with it, as they took heavy inspiration from Renaissance artist Hieronymus Bosch. I can't even say inspired, as they just straight up copied the exact design for so many different enemies and bosses. But still, I absolutely love the designs. Also, I can't talk about art style in an Atlus game without mentioning its UI and menus. These might just be the most beautifully crafted menus I've ever seen. Atlus never disappoint with these. Actually, talking about the setting a bit more though, I love it. I think they did an unbelievable job of crafting this brand new world. And I think there's potential to explore so much more as well in future titles, which I assume they would do with this new IP. They do a fantastic job of fleshing out the kingdom of Ukrainia with the different cities that you visit and tying in all these different locations into the plot. Funnily enough, Ukrainia somewhat means a fantasy or an alternate history or a utopia, which is basically some of the biggest themes that we explore in this game. The art style for Metaphor really brings the most out of this world, and it really feels alive with everything going on in the story. They do a great job of bringing the side content and story into the world, and the world itself being part of these things, and instead of it just being a place to explore, it is a crucial plot point. Moving on from the setting, the next part of this video is the gameplay. The major portion of gameplay that I'll be speaking on is the combat, as that's the biggest gameplay element. And I really do love it in this game. It has a lot of similarities to Persona 3 Reload from my experience, but is also vastly different in many ways. Starting off with the things that were added, firstly was passing a turn whenever you wanted to. In the Persona games, you had to hit the enemy's weakness and then you yourself got an extra turn, or in Persona 5 and 3 Reload, you could pass it to another teammate. But in Metaphor, you could pass your turn whenever you wanted to. I love this feature as it adds a bit more strategy to your playstyle. They also implemented features from Shin Megami Tensei to make the combat feel more challenging. In SMT, if you hit an enemy's weakness, you retain your turn, or in other words, get a half turn. But if you miss an attack, you lose 2 turns. This feature was implemented into Metaphor ReFantazio, and I think it was a welcome addition. They also have a feature that involves some positioning by being able to place your characters in the front row or back row depending on the situation. In the front row, your physical attack is strengthened, but your defense is worsened and it's flipped for the back row. They also implemented a slightly forgiving feature, as when the main character dies in battle, it is no longer a game over, which I do highly appreciate. It was always so annoying when my whole squad is good but then I die and the game ends. There is also a feature called Synthesis where you and a companion with a compatible lineage would combine your powers to do a very powerful attack that would take up 2 to 3 turns. Again, this is a great feature and added a lot to the overall combat. But probably one of the biggest features in terms of the combat that was introduced here was real-time combat being utilized. This was no revolutionary real-time combat with it boiling down to attacking and dodging. But it made going through dungeons so much more bearable as weaker enemies you could just take out in real time without having to go into a turn-based sequence which took up more time. It helped with the flow of the combat in exploring these dungeons. Now, moving on from the combat itself, we get introduced to our new version of personas which are called archetypes. These things are similar but again also very different from personas. The archetypes are weirdly kind of like a skill tree. We have these different lineages that are unlocked through getting different followers, and within these lineages we have the archetypes that are specialized for that lineage. This is different from Persona as we can't really combine different archetypes together to make a stronger one. Within these lineages there are usually anywhere from 2 to 4 different archetypes that you can get, and each one you unlock is stronger than the last. You can also take up to 4 different abilities from any of the other archetypes to put on your main depending on how far you are leveled up with that follower in that specific lineage. And one other thing I really like about the archetypes is that your companions are not just bound to being their own lineage and archetypes. They can be any archetype they want to, and I really enjoy that feature as you can mix and match your squad with different archetypes and really specialize them in specific roles. With Persona games, their roles are basically set in place from the get-go, but with Metaphor you can really pick and choose what roles they have. Overall, the archetypes are so well made and I love the detail that they gave them, and they make the overall combat experience a lot more enjoyable. And one last thing I'll quickly touch on is the day-to-day life that you have in this game. As very typical of Persona games, there is a day cycle in Metaphor. I adore this feature and wish more games took it on. It really makes the world feel more alive in that these events are happening in real time and you have to plan what to do with your time according to the major events of this game. But one thing I will praise Metaphor with is that it is a lot more forgiving of a day cycle. With all the Persona games, you realistically need a guide to finish everything, but Metaphor you can go about it at your own pace and style, and for the most part complete all the side quests and social links. It's something that is definitely improved from the Persona games. That was a lot of info to drop all at once, but I'm hoping you guys got all that. But we are finished talking about the gameplay at least, and we're moving into the side characters of this game. In most videos, I normally wouldn't dedicate a whole section to side characters as I would just tie them into the story section. But something that Atlas is known for is emphasizing on side characters and building relationships with them as a key gameplay feature. And it's no different here. You have these things called followers, and here you go on personal journeys with all the people you have in your squad along with other people you meet along your journey. It's just easily my favorite part about these games, and I've only played Persona 3 Reload, but I think they handled these followers a lot better in Metaphor in many ways. They did handle it worse in some, but I'll get to that. Biggest reason why I think they were better is that each journey feels very distinct and unique, as a lot of the social links in Persona games are in this school setting. But in Metaphor, each follower has such a unique storyline that you go on and feel very separate from everything else. And there are not a bloated amount of these, so there genuinely isn't a single follower mission that I feel like is straight up bad. Unlike Persona where there are multiple social links I did not like at all. The quality of these follower missions are high and extremely enjoyable. If you love a game with in-depth side characters and a cast that is genuinely relevant, this game nails it. Some of the things that do annoy me about the followers or some of my critiques is that these missions are not all voice acted. Each follower in this game have 8 ranks or 8 missions to go on with them, and it's only the first and last mission that are voice acted. Now look, in most situations this wouldn't be the biggest issue for me, but as someone that played Persona 3 Reload before this and had every social link be voice acted, it weirdly felt like a step back. Now, the only reason I can possibly think this is the case is potentially budget, as it was a brand new IP instead of something established like Persona. Again, that's a shot in the dark, I have no idea why they weren't fully voice acted. But something that is outside of that, and more specifically the main cast or your squad, I feel like once you finish their character arc of them getting introduced to your team, they kinda became irrelevant to the plot. And here I'm going to get into some quick spoilers, so here's the time to skip to if you don't want to hear those. Okay, so getting into it, throughout the story, outside of your initial squad of Hulkenberg and Stroll, if you're here I'm assuming you've played the game, you know we get Haizme, Juna, Yufa, and Basilio on our team. When they join, they all have their own little character arcs, but afterwards they don't serve the plot really as they're just on your team. Juna stays relevant for a little bit longer though until we take out her sister. Again, the only game I can really directly compare this to is Persona 3 Reload, as that's the only other Atlas game I've played. For me, the characters in your squad stayed relevant and were important at all different parts throughout the story. Obviously some moments they weren't, but every character impacted the narrative and you watched them be impacted by the story. Like straight up, every character in your squad in Persona 3 Reload gets direct development through the plot and not just in the social link. With Metaphor, I didn't always feel our characters being affected by the actions in the narrative, it just kind of felt like they were experiencing it and not living it. Again, this is a really nitpicky thing to say, it's not even the biggest issue for me at all. At times, I just felt like they weren't important, especially someone like Stroll. I really like his character, but gosh, I really don't feel like he impacts the narrative at all, especially after the intro of the game. And the same thing with Heisme, after his arc he's kinda irrelevant, and so is everyone to a point. I think Persona 3 handled implementing the side characters into the overall narrative better in comparison, but by no means do the characters in Metaphor not impact things. All their individual arcs are amazing and some of the best parts of this game. The followers are spectacular and one of the best parts of this entire experience. They all individually give you a different outlook and insight of the world. As all these characters for the most part have different social standings and are different races, still they have a different perspective and situation in the world that we are in. They all give us a unique experience and view of things which I love. We learn more about all these different races and how they combat living, and it's beautifully done. And like I was complaining how our squad members at times don't feel like they impact the narrative, within these follower missions they are so fleshed out and it's beautiful to watch their development. With that being said though, it's time to get into the final section of this video, which is the story and narrative, so let's get into it. The narrative in Metaphor ReFantazio is a fascinating one. The basic plot of this game is the king of Uchronia gets assassinated, and through his assassination there is a vacancy at the throne. Through the king's death, he was able to use his magic to create a system that after a few months, whatever candidate had the most public support will win the throne. Basically, the next king is up to the people. Us, the protagonist, our goal is to help the bedridden prince get to the throne. Years ago, the prince got cursed and in the public eye is assumed dead, but he's not. So, we go through this journey seeking to break this curse and bring the prince to the throne, but I promise you, as you play the game, the narrative is so much more than just that. Continuing from that, they pace this narrative, I honestly feel like, to perfection. At every point throughout the game, I felt like something interesting was going on and was engaged with this story. Every single arc that we go through is enjoyable and well done, and they continue to add layers and different pieces to the story as we go along. For a game that is as long as Metaphor, you normally would expect some slower sections of the game or some parts that are kinda monotonous. But no, at least from my experience, everything from the main story sections and the time we get to do side content is spaced out so perfectly and it feels like such a natural progression. Each arc is special and has its own unique aspects that make it better than other ones. And now, if you love a game with a good villain that is prevalent throughout the main story, Metaphor ReFantazio has that for you. The main villain of this game is Luis, and he is beautifully written. He's probably pretty high up there for me for gaming villains in recent years. He goes so well against the protagonist and they very much oppose one another with the way of getting their ideals. It's funny as Luis has a lot of things that us as a player might agree with, but ultimately his means of achieving them is where he pulls more into being this evil character. He's probably my favorite character in the game. He commands the player's attention every time he is on screen. He is so theatrical in what he does and I love it. He is hands down the best part of this story. Now, this game is an RPG, but I don't want people thinking that this game is choice heavy. You really don't have much control of where the narrative goes besides in like a few sections, but they just cause a bad ending where the game ends early. There is a set storyline that is told here, and I think they do a brilliant job with it. This game does such a good job at building up this world and fleshing out all these different groups of people and us exploring them throughout the journey. We go to so many different locations and cities where there is such a different feel from the last. We go from this sprawling, super populated city to a more local town to this remote island where foreigners aren't allowed, and it offers such a wide range of experiences. This is one of the best stories that I've played this year. With constant high stakes, plot twists, great action sequences, slower world building moments, this game has it all in terms of narrative. A major theme that is within Metaphor ReFantazio though is the idea of fantasy. And not in the typical way you might be thinking. Yes, this is a fantasy game, but they don't use it in that sense. As I've explained, the world in this game is in turmoil. Most people groups don't get along, you have corruption, betrayal, the assassination of the king, the world cannot be worse right now. So, they use this idea of fantasy as a hope for the future or a new world that you can imagine. A place where everyone gets along and has equal opportunities of a successful life where they are not pushed down by their societal standing. This game pushes the idea that every concept that the world has built is in some way a fantasy because someone had to come up with it. Someone had an idea that was executed and turned into reality. So, us as a protagonist pushed this idea and tried to create our own fantasy. A world that is better than the one we are in right now, one where everyone has hope for a good life and are able to achieve that. because all the ideas that are already in place come from somewhere as well, so why can't we do the same? It is such an interesting concept to explore, and I love the way they handle it throughout the game. Metaphor's narrative overall is just a great one, and at every point I was enjoying the story that was being told, and it just continued to get better and better. I loved watching Atlus move away from their typical formula of games and giving us a fantasy world. I adore the fantasy genre so much, and watching them do this was a dream come true. The narrative is impeccable and probably the best part of this game, just every character is so fleshed out, the world building is done immaculately, and the pacing is arguably perfect. I am not surprised whatsoever that this game won Best Narrative of the Year. Meta ReFantazio is truly a special video game and the one that I think should have won Game of the Year. Astrobot was a fairly deserving game, don't get me wrong, I had a great time playing it and it is my runner-up. But the 120-ish hours that I put into Metaphor was one I deeply enjoyed from start to finish. I know some people might get turned away from it since it's a JRPG or since it's turn-based, but I promise you, I highly recommend you give this game a chance. There is a demo that is still available if you want to see if you would enjoy it or not. There is a reason that this game won Best RPG, Best Narrative, and Best Art Direction at the Game Awards. It's because it's a truly fantastic game. Atlus took a jump for the first time in a while by making a new IP, and it could not have been more of a success for the studio. I can't wait to see the series continue, which I definitely assume that it will, as I love this one. Again, if you love fantasy games, if you love RPGs, this game deserves a glance as it's some of the best in recent years in those regards. And that is why I believe Meta ReFantazio should have won Game of the Year. If you guys made it to the end of this video, thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, it would mean a lot if you could like, comment, and subscribe. Again, your guys' support means the absolute world to me, you don't even understand. Again, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I will see you in the next one, and God bless.